Well, if you wanted a little cameo as to why Max Verstappen is lining up, probably tomorrow, but maybe on Sunday, to clinch his third World Championship, look no further than what happened in Qatar on Friday. Max was one of the first out on the track just to see what the new surface was like when first practice, I say first practice, the only untimed practice began this afternoon in Qatar. But very quickly it was clear that the new track surface, combined with dust and quite a lot of wind and sand, therefore made it a circuit that was naturally going to pick up grip as the day and therefore the evening progressed. So we didn't see Max going particularly quickly in what, let's call it FP1 still on the Friday, although Red Bull there or thereabouts looking very good on the straights. But if you'd taken a snapshot in the middle of Friday, you would have thought, wow, McLaren are quick, Fernando Alonso's really quick in the Aston Martin, Ferrari looking a lot better than expected around Qatar. But of course, that was just Max letting the track come to him, and we saw that during qualifying. The combination of the new track surface, the wind and the track picking up grip made it a very difficult lap to put together on a new set of soft Pirellis. Not because the corners at Qatar are up there with, say, I don't know, the S's at Suzuka or Pouin at Spa. It was because of the way the track had this knife-edgy grip feel. If you warmed up the tyres perfectly, even then you're on the edge of a precipice in terms of how the track conditions were going to change during the lap. It was getting quicker all the time, but it was very, very easy. As we saw from a lot of drivers who went over track limits and lost their lap time, it was very easy to fall foul of Qatar on that Friday night. So it wasn't necessarily about great corners, getting the best from the drivers, or indeed the worst from the drivers. It was about manipulating the temperature of the Pirelli tyre to be absolutely perfect and then to make no mistakes, which meant, of course, perfect rates of input in terms of throttle, steering, brakes, in terms of footwork and handwork. We saw that from Max Verstappen. As qualifying progressed, he got more and more confident in the car. He knew where he could push. And he was always leaving a little bit in reserve, I think, in Sector 2, because there it was very, very difficult to feel the car, to feel the front end. And you only needed the front end to slide just slightly and you're way off over the track limit. So he was always leaving a bit of reserve there on that medium to high speed section in Sector 2, but really good in Sectors 1 and 3, where you can use a bit of braking, use a bit of turning, use a bit of traction. And that's where the lap time came from. He put in his pole lap in his first run in Q3. He would call it the banker lap, but it was a really good lap under 124. And then on the second lap, he really went for it, got a bit sideways, ran out of road, but the pole by then was unquestionably his. So it was a day of errors. It was a day of not making mistakes. It was a day of looking ahead as to what the lap was going to be, where to push and where to shove. And that really, in many ways, showed up the difference, I think, between Max and Lando Norris in a very good car around Qatar, as predicted. The hard Pirelli range of tyres really suiting that McLaren yet again. And Lando, I'm not saying he would have had the pole, but he could have been within a tenth or two of Max. But on both his laps, he ran out of road, a track limits drama. Yes, Oscar Piastri did the same on his second lap, and he'll be starting further down the grid than he should. But then he is a rookie, and then he's kind of entitled to make that sort of mistake. But for Lando to make that same mistake, two different corners, admittedly, turn 5 and then turn 10 on the second run, but to make those two mistakes on those two runs again shows that his rates of input are not quite up there with Max Verstappen. That's not just suppleness and it's not just smoothness, it's also exactly in harmony with what the car is asking you to do. So that's one area where obviously Lando is lacking to Max Verstappen. I don't think this was a day or a circuit even where short corner driving really can be rewarded. Most of the corners there are line lock corners, medium high speed corners. There's really only one way to get around them, and it's all about feeling that grip. It's all about the way you load up the car. So rather than seeing Max in short corner form, we're seeing Max basically doing the same corner as Lando Norris, but doing it slightly better. But for Lando, again, I think on top of that rates of input issue, there is also the question of the pressure from Oscar Piastri as well, and how quickly Oscar is going in that second car. That will for sure have had an effect on the way he drives and the way he thinks about his driving. Lando doesn't know yet where Oscar is going quicker and doing a better job than he. And I think that is the problem, because if you don't know exactly where you're losing, it's very difficult then to build and to improve for the future. I mean, I was astonished that Lando made that mistake, actually. I was convinced that he was going to do a great lap on that second run, because it isn't a circuit that's going to really penalise his lack of short corners. It is a circuit that rewards on this day. It was a circuit that rewarded on this day. Feel for the grip. Feel for the variables, feel for the grip. There was wind, there was sand, there was dust, the track was picking up grip, it was hot. And those things should have been right in Lando's ballpark, because he is very, very good and very supple with his inputs. So there was your cameo. There was Max Verstappen timing everything perfectly and realizing, I think, quite early on that this was going to be a very edgy qualifying session where it was going to be very easy to lose a lap because of a track limits thing. I think he was on top of that mentally by the end of the unofficial session in the afternoon, long before they went into qualifying. And that was his mode of operation. That was his modus operandi. It was definitely to leave margin where it was easiest to lose the feel of the front of the car. And he never did that, lose that feel. And he did a great job, even though he went into Q3 not having been the quickest. Who was actually quickest in Q2? None other than Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. Mercedes kind of left everything quite late, went out when the track was picking up grip, and it wasn't quite as crowded as had been for, say, the Red Bulls or the Ferraris or even the McLarens. Good job there. But Lewis also blew it on that last lap, unbelievably. I don't know, I can't explain that other than to say he's been around so long that maybe it's just starting to tell all the pressure, all the stuff we've seen from George. Because there's no doubt today Lewis was quick enough to beat George and quick enough, therefore, to get relatively near the Red Bull. But on that last run, George went slightly quicker. It was as if George was just sort of, getting ready for that last Q3 run and went out and did it. And Lewis, where was he? He was in oversteer in the middle of one of the corners, having lost the back end. And that's very unlike Lewis. And that, if you think about Lewis from 2-3 years ago, that's very, very unlike Lewis. And he will say, well, I didn't get the tyres right or this or that. He's been around a long time, and I suppose under that sort of pressure and that sort of microscope, that's what we're going to see quite a lot of. Even so, with the two McLaren drivers losing their laps, it's Mercedes second and third behind Max Verstappen. There's quite a big margin. I mean, Max 23.7, George 24.2, Lewis 24.3. And also, significantly, Max 320 kilometers an hour on the straight when he did that lap with no toe. And George Russell 313, Lewis 316. So Max taking into the race not only a car which is obviously very good around the lap and he knows where to leave margin, he knows where to get the best from it, but also has a top speed advantage. And if anything is a good race car, it is that for sure. If you just add those up, even if you didn't know it was a Red Bull, you'd say, wow, that is a wonderful package. So that's what's happening there. Fernando Alonso lines up P4 in the Aston Martin. He was really quick out of the box. It looked like one of those Aston weekends. And yeah, it's a good lap time, 24.3. Mercedes lap time, though, that's what will be annoying for them if they really think about it, beaten by the two factory Mercedes. But from where they're coming from where Fernando's been over the last couple of months, it's a very, very good performance. As I've always said, expect more from Fernando in the race. Qualifying isn't absolutely his forte, although they did a very, very good job today. And Fernando, 3.21, he's actually quicker than the Mercedes on the straight as well. So he'll be thinking of Sunday. Obviously, they're thinking of the sprint and the shootout for tomorrow. But going into Sunday, because this is qualifying for the Grand Prix, he will be thinking, I've got a car here where I can beat the two factory Mercs. And that'll, of course, be a very good result. Got to say, though, as a sort of appendix to all of that, Lance Stroll, again, had an appalling weekend, didn't even get out of Q1. What is going on with this guy? His father has bought this team to enable him to win the World Championship, to win Grand Prix. That's what it's all about. Get him out of the Williams. It was hopeless. And look where he is. I mean, it's just, it's going from bad to worse with Lance. Started really with that, the Singapore shunt was just sort of in the middle of it all. So in a very good car, Lance Stroll again failed to get out of Q1 in the other Aston Martin. Charles Leclerc lines up next in the Ferrari. He seemed pretty fractious all day. He wasn't very happy about the way they were using the traffic, and he got involved in some skirmishes as well, as did Carlos Sainz. But he got the best out of the car on that lap, no doubt about that. I didn't predict, but I kind of thought through how the Ferraris were going to go, the two Ferraris drivers were going to go in Qatar. And I thought this was not a circuit where Carlos Sainz was going to be slow by any means, and that he would probably be pretty near, if not slightly ahead of Charles Leclerc. Well, I was wrong about that. And I'm still trying to think why, because it's a bit like the Lando Norris thing, I think. I mean, around this circuit, his longer corners shouldn't have been a penalty. But I think it just showed up on a day which was all about grip coming and going, a real knife edge feel for when you can be quick and when you can't, and when you got to back away. That sort of very, very knife edgy, razor sharp edge to do with the temperature of the tires, the wind, the track surface and the sand, all those things coming together on a very hot night anyway. It was all about, as I say, it was all about feeling the surface of the road. And I guess that was a reminder also that when I talk about drivers who have this ability to shorten the corner, they can do that because they have incredible feel for the surface of the road and their inputs are almost perfect. Even though they may make other mistakes, the rate of input, the rate at which they turn the wheel, the rate at which they come out of the brake pedal pressure or load up the throttle, all of them are just about perfect, as we've been talking about with Max earlier in the video. And I think that's a reminder. I mean, that's why those guys are also good in the wet, where they don't shorten corners. It's because their rates of input are so good. And that, I think, shows up the difference again between Carlos and Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc has that. It was difficult to get it out. I mean, eventually they got there, but it was a scratchy day. As I said, the Ferrari was never going to be a great car, in my opinion, around Qatar, because there aren't the things there to reward what it does well. It's quick in a straight line. It has very good braking from high speed, providing its tyres are managed well. And none of those things could be highlighted around Qatar. So it was all about trying to get the car to work around, medium high-speed corners, difficult long corners, difficult for Ferrari. But Charles did a good job with that. He did a very good job. He had his fair share of moments as well. Let's just look at the top speeds of where he is in doing that, 317. So yeah, I mean, 317. So they're obviously running quite a lot of downforce. If you look at Fernando Alonso 321, Ferrari about where Mercedes are in terms of top speed, which is relatively slow for them. So that's all about running as much downforce as they can on the car. But Charles too did make an error in Q3. He also lost. He also did a track limits thing, turn 5, but he got it together. So he got that lap in. More than can be said for Carlos Sainz, who didn't get out of Q2, and that was because he lost both laps with track limits. So not very good at all. Pierre Gasly, I thought, did a very good job. Alpine, not bad. Reasonably quick in a straight line, sort of Mercedes territory for a car which doesn't have brilliant power with the Renault engine. But Pierre Gasly, slightly quicker than Esteban Ocon, very good. And Valtteri Bottas made it through, genuinely made it through to Q3 and won't be starting 10th in the Alfa Romeo because of the dramas with Lando Norris. So very good job from Valtteri. I mean, in terms of top speeds, quite difficult to do genuine comparisons here because there's so much traffic and you see a lot of toes. But I think the two key elements are that Red Bull are quickest in a straight line, not by a massive margin, but they are quickest. And the slowest in a straight line by a considerable margin, Alfa Romeo. But it obviously works for them around the lap. Lots of downforce, get the car to work, no mistake. And Valtteri Bottas into top 10 qualifying for the Qatar Grand Prix on Sundays. And for the record, this is basically what happened in the untimed session this morning, just that 1 hour to get the cars trimmed and set up for the rest of the weekend. Some drivers went out right at the end to do a quick run on the soft tyre. Some ran only the medium and the hard. So I put that up. As you can see, Fernando Alonso on the right-hand side there, quickest of the medium runners, 27.9. That was why I said Fernando looking pretty good going into this weekend out of the box, and that would have put him, P3, P4 amongst the soft tyre runners. So that was a very good start for Aston Martin. Max 27.4, and there you can see Carlos Sainz 27.7. So early on the soft tyre, you would have thought, Ferrari surprisingly good around Qatar, and Sergio Perez 28. He was never really dancing with the music. And the two Mercedes and McLaren drivers focusing on the medium and the hard tyre, and looking at what McLaren then did on the hard tyre, that 28.3, not a bad lap at all. Anyway, that was in the morning when the track was much slower. It evolved dramatically in the evening for the qualifying session. So we'll see what happens tomorrow in the shootout and then the sprint race, and this qualifying session, of course, relates to the Grand Prix that we'll see on Sunday. So we'll see you then, another video tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks for watching, thanks to Pitbox, and thanks to Jack Craft. See you soon.